Good afternoon, everyone. So we got two topics for today. The first one that I wanted to bring up was the ride-sharing ordinance, which is involving a very important legislative action that is likely taking place at the full City Council meeting tomorrow. First, I want to give you my position. I support more than doubling the rate of pay that drivers for rideshare companies are able to make. I support making sure that the work that they do is valued and that they're able to get the compensation that is indicative of the hard job that they have. Now, the council wants to take that pay even further to a rate where Uber and Lyft would effectively leave the city. Not only would that not do any good for the drivers, because it doesn't do any good to get a pay raise if you no longer have a job, but it's also very problematic for residents of our city and tourists, people that use ride-sharing service in some form. This is people with a disability. It's people of lower incomes that can't necessarily afford to buy a car, and when public transportation doesn't work in full, they need a mechanism from getting from point A to point B. This is for people that work odd hours at times, that just need to be able to get to a job or place of work without an automobile. This is also for tourists, people coming to our city for a convention or otherwise that show up at MSP and need to get to a hotel or their convention center. All of these are ways that rideshare is ultimately used, and if this were to leave our city entirely, yes, of course, it's a big problem. Now, importantly, we don't need to choose between giving drivers a necessary raise and continuing to have Uber and Lyft in our city. We can do both of these things at the same time. If we engage all of the different entities involved, that's drivers, riders, and rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft, we're able to strike a balance and meet the necessary goals that I think that we all share. Now, I'm going to make a prediction, and I said this yesterday, and I hope that I'm ultimately wrong, and that prediction is that the City Council is going to move forward with the exact same dollar figure, the exact same rate of pay that I vetoed about a half a year ago. Half a year ago, I told City Council members that I was willing to dramatically, in fact more than double the rate of the pay, and I would sign such an ordinance into law. I sat down with City Council members. We provided emails documenting exactly what we were willing to support and what we weren't willing to support. We met with all of the different stakeholders, from rideshare companies to drivers to riders, to try to find legislation that would ultimately work. The members of the City Council that drafted the policy did not do the same thing. They did not engage with all of the stakeholders that are involved. And because of that, I have concerns that the ordinance that is being brought forward lacks balance and could potentially result in Uber and Lyft leaving the city entirely. Now, we may have the votes to be able to sustain a veto override. We may not get overridden, thus, of course, keeping Uber and Lyft in the city, but that would not result in drivers getting the necessary bump in pay that I think we all support. So rather than have this back and forth ordinance put forward, followed by veto, followed by override or not override, we could agree to agree on both increasing the driver pay, in fact, more than doubling the rate of pay, and keeping this very important service in our city. This is what public service is all about. It's about balancing a bunch of different interests for the sake of the ecosystem that is the city of Minneapolis. And so that's what I'm pushing for right now. That's what I'd like to see. I don't know if legislatively we're going to be able to get there, but I just want to call out ahead of time that there is a route to do this right. With that, I'll open it to any questions you might have.
Mayor, what's your response to folks who say that Uber and Lyft have made these sort of threats before in other cities and that they're empty threats and the city of Minneapolis should just move forward with this?
It's important to look at the specifics that have happened in other cities, and in some instances, we've had ordinances that have passed followed by some form of change in the law or preemption from the state. Obviously, that could happen here as well. You know, the City Council could pass an ordinance that's vetoed by me. They could override my veto. Uber and Lyft could leave the city, and a month and a half later, the state could preempt us by lowering the rate of pay that the city council had since authorized. And then, of course, Uber and Lyft would come back to the city. The important thing here is I think the conversation has been made far too simplistic. This is not about do you support driver increase in pay or not support driver increase in pay. I think we would all agree that there is a rate out there. We can argue about what the rate is, but we can all agree that there is a rate out there at which the ride-sharing companies will say, this no longer works, we're losing substantial money, we're out. I say that not because I care about Uber and Lyft's bottom line. I don't. I don't care about their bottom line. I do care about having this service in the city. I do care about getting drivers paid more money. And I do care that the service itself is actually affordable to people that need it. There are other cities throughout the country where the median salary of riders is 15% above the area median income. What we've seen here is that the average annual take-home for riders is about 15 to 20% below the area median income. So in other words, low-income people are using rideshare more often in the city of Minneapolis than they are in other places. Additionally, and I've said this before, we need to be making our decisions based on data. We can't be making assumptions. We need to be making these decisions based on data. In the coming week or two, like in the very near future, the state of Minnesota will be issuing a whole boatload of data that gives real analysis and information about how much drivers are actually making, where they're making that money, and potentially how to better craft an ordinance around it. We should use that data in creating an ordinance. Now, I have a figure that I've put forward that I believe we know will both increase the rate of pay for drivers and we hope will keep Uber and Lyft in the city. But again, the data is about to come out. I think it makes a lot of sense to listen to it.
Mayor Frey, so I think I heard you say if the state made a law, then the city could maybe go back and lower the rates, just as an example. But I guess my question is about the state and how much influence that task force was created. How is that shaping what's going on now?
So I'm not suggesting that the state would make a law and the city could go back and change it. That could happen. The state could preempt local municipalities from enacting their own ordinances in this field of work. So in other words, the state could set the dollar amount per mile and per minute, and then cities would have to follow suit. So what I'm suggesting is it's possible that the city council could pass an ordinance, override my veto, enact a policy here. Uber and Lyft could then move out on the effective date that is April 1st, and then a month and a half later, the state could, I'm not saying they will, they could preempt the city from the ordinance that they had just passed. They would have precedent, they would have authorization to do that because they're the state. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen, I'm saying that has happened. That wouldn't be Uber and Lyft going back on their word. That would be a different set of circumstances that would result in them coming back into the city. And what I'm suggesting is we can pass an ordinance that's thoughtful here. We can engage all of the stakeholders. Again, and I need to make this very, very clear, I support more than doubling the rate of pay for drivers. I'll say it again. I support more than doubling the rate of pay for drivers. If the city council were to pass such an ordinance, I would sign it immediately into law, increasing the rate of pay for drivers throughout the city and keeping this important service in our city. And again, we've talked before about how important rideshare service is to people in the city. It's not just getting drunk people home from the bar on a Friday night. That's part of it. But it's also social services that utilize vouchers to provide low-income people and people who they need help. They provide them vouchers so that they're able to get to the service they need. It's to help out with people that have a disability, get to a job or get to treatment or get to the grocery store. It's helping people that don't have a car. I mean, we're talking about moving away from a fully individual automobile-centric mentality, and part of that is giving people options. One of those options is public transit, and we're encouraging people to use it. Another one of those options that people without a car occasionally use is rideshare. It's not the be-all, end-all. It is an important mode of transit, though.
What was the rate that you claimed? It was $1.17 a mile?
We upped it. So it's $1.20 a mile, 34 cents a minute. And again, I said to the city council members nearly half of a year ago that I would support more than doubling the rate. What I wouldn't support is an ordinance that they moved forward without actually engaging the parties involved. You got an email from Lyft just this morning, I believe, that said that the information that the council has been putting out there is blatantly false. I'm not sure if that was the exact quote, but it was pretty close. We should be asking all of the entities involved what the impacts are. We should also not be afraid of the data itself. And finally, we can't be operating exclusively in a political realm. If this is about helping people, if this is about getting drivers an increase in pay, we have the ability to do that. What I could imagine happening is that they put forward the rate that I've already said I would veto. I veto it, just like I said I would, many times, in writing and verbally. And then they aren't able to override my veto, and rather than taking the steps to help the drivers out that they claim to want to help, they just call it a day. So rather than, we shouldn't have people sitting on their hands. We should have people working to find common ground and passing policy that helps the people that we all purport we want to help. I'm sick of the politics. So why I'm making this prediction right now is I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But there's no way that they're going to be able to blame me for a lack of a wage increase for drivers when they're not able to talk and negotiate and work with the rideshare companies that are here in the city. Any other questions?
Do the rates you're proposing have any other benefits for drivers, like is there a $5 minimum, or where can we find the information you're talking about?
There is a $5 minimum. I don't know that necessarily comes through an ordinance, but through policy that the rideshare companies have implemented. You should probably talk to them rather than quote me on this. Additionally, I do believe that there's quite a bit of room to talk and negotiate about additional benefits beyond the wage. I'm not a legislator. I'm not on the city council. But if they were to take the time to talk with the organization that they may very well disagree adamantly with, I do believe there would be common ground. And this is one of the problems right now in politics today. You designate certain organizations and people as villains and certain organizations and people as benevolent, and you don't talk outside of your little bubble. Talk with them. See what they're willing to do. You might find a win-win situation where you're able to keep this important service and give drivers the raise that they need. So that's what I'm for.
Mayor, just really quickly, what sort of conversations have you had with potential swing voters on the council, and do you have enough support for an override?
I'm not going to speak for members of the city council, and I don't want to provide information that they should probably be providing themselves. But I appreciate the question because it's probably the right one to ask. There's been clarity of purpose since day one on this, and I know so much of the coverage has been reduced to, do you support? A lot of the coverage, and this is not your fault, but it's been, do you support drivers or not? Again, we do. And we've taken the necessary steps to make sure that there is an ordinance that is put forward or could be put forward that more than doubles their pay and keeps this important business in the city. Any other questions?
All right, we're going to take a couple minutes to regroup for the next press conference.
Great.